Hello and welcome back to Buyer's Guide. Now there's been a lot of animosity regarding the fuel prices, with the price constantly increasing and there seems to be no end in sight.
Motorists have a bleak outlook on future prices and there is very little transparency in what is actually going on. So that's why we are joined in studio today by Leighton Beard from the AA to provide us with some insight into fuel pricing.
Now obviously
Welcome,
Leighton has it. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
The consumer lately has been hammered with the fuel prices.
You're looking for a better word there.
Yeah, I have, but couldn't say it on a family show.
Yeah.
It's been really tough for a lot of consumers, well, anybody who drives a car, even if you don't,
Yes.
it affects you, if you're jumping in a taxi,
Exactly,
and so
yeah.
forth.
If you're eating, it's affecting you, because if food has to be transported from Zanin down to Gauteng or from the coast up to Gauteng or Limpopo, whatever, it's going to affect you. Wholesalers have to sell their goods. They have to truck it up. I mean, we're a really road freight reliant society. That food has got to get transported somehow. And how do the wholesalers absorb that this increase? Well, they pass it on to you and me. So your cauliflower cost you R1.50 in January. Now it's costing you R2.50. It sounds very little, but add this basket together, it's going to be affecting everybody.
It's everything, as you
And
mentioned
that's just
earlier.
food.
And that's food,
That's just food. What about everything else? Everything else is affected by fuel
Everything.
pricing.
I mean, consider that it's going to cost a lot of money to transport that stuff up, from wherever to get to Gauteng. You've got to pay wages. You've got, and things have got to match. So, off air we were discussing, if you've got people employed and things have got more expensive, they're going to be coming to you saying, but we can't afford this anymore. So you may have to factor increases into that as well. So across the board, it's costing everybody a lot of money.
Yeah, but you see, when you're running a business, every month you can't increase your labor rate.
You can't do that.
You can't
exactly.
change the price.
So
of
you have to
parts.
absorb it somehow. So what we're finding, especially with single consumers, is, for instance, beginning of the year it cost you 600 Rand to fill your tank of fuel. Now it costs you 850. So where do you get that extra 200 Rand from? I'll get rid of my life insurance. Maybe I won't pay this person this month. I won't get, I won't get the garden service in, whatever. And then it becomes a little bit more dire, where there's some things that you really need, like for instance insurance, where you're saying, well, maybe I'm going to cut back on my insurance, which is actually not a great idea, because if you're in an accident, it's going to cost you more.
Yep.
But the point is that people are looking at ways to actually manage this increase. And as you said, with no end in sight, people are really worried about what's going to happen in the months ahead. So they're beginning to plan now. Say, well, let's cancel, our insurance now. Let's stop this now. Let's do whatever now, just to absorb these costs.
The difficulty, I suppose, with this is, what can we, as a normal individual, do about it? Basically nothing, can you?
There's very little you can do about it. I mean, I think, the advice we always give people is make sure your car's in a good working condition, in a good running order, because then it's going to use the right amount of fuel. I mean, that's a given. Check your driving habits, because if you brake hard, if you rev hard, you're obviously going to use a lot more fuel. So that's something that you can do. It's very small things. Some of the bigger things you can do, I mean, obviously, the less you drive, the less fuel you're going to use.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to carpool to work. So there are one or two things you can try. Public transport is one, but unfortunately, it's not reliable and cost effective in many places. But if it is available to you and it is reliable and it is going to be cheaper than using your vehicle, then that may be an option to you. Other than that, Adam, unfortunately, there isn't much more you can do about it.
You mentioned public transport.
Yeah.
That's also going to go up. Because
it is going to go up, but generally, like with taxi fares, they go up normally once a year. Bus fares go up normally once a year. That's why I say, if a trip is going to cost you, if for instance you have to do a trip on public transport and a leg of that trip means you have to walk, it may work out cheaper for you to use that public transport, on any given day. I mean, to Adam's point, what can you do if you're an individual motorist? Look, I mean, there are certain things that we would tell people to do. Keeping your car in a good condition is obviously one of them. If you can't do that and it's too expensive for you to do that, then that's the case. Then you can't do that. How do you deal with the petrol increases? Well, you just got to budget. I mean, the best advice we can give is budget properly and make sure, if you know you have to get to work, because that's how you earn an income, you have to budget for that. It may be that you have to cut on other expenses. If it's a grudge purchase, like a service that you have to cut back on, I'm not going to tell people not to do it. But that's unfortunately, Sagi, what's happening out there.
In terms of the price of fuel, it's made up of a lot of taxes. What percentage of it is taxes?
Around 35 to 38% of every litre of fuel is made up of taxes. So you've got a basic fuel price, which is around R6.70. You add a wholesale margin onto that. You add a retail margin of around R1.90 onto that. And then you add your taxes. So you've got R3.37 for the general fuel levy. Now that money goes directly to the Treasury. It's not used for any road-related or transport-related infrastructure or development.
So it's not ring-fenced.
It's not ring-fenced at all. It can
Chucked
be
into
used
the
for anything.
general fiscus.
So we're looking at around 80 billion rand a year from the general fuel levy. It can be used for anything. It can be used to buy school books. It can be used to build clinics. It can be used for roads, but it's not earmarked for roads or transport-related purposes. So that's the general fuel levy. And then you've got 193, which is the road accident fund levy, and that goes to compensate victims of car crashes. So together, 5.30 of every litre of petrol. So obviously, depending on the octane of fuel you're using, if you're using 93 unleaded octane, 5.30 of that, roughly about 38 to 40% of every litre of fuel.
Where do you see this going? I mean, in terms of, I've read reports that we can expect fuel prices around about 19 Rand by the end of the year.
So the two big drivers of the fuel price are the Rand US dollar exchange rate and international petroleum prices. Now, when we look at the increase going into September of, say, 25 cents per litre, 1 cent of that 25 cent increase is because of international petroleum prices. 24 cents of the increase is because of the weak rand against the dollar. So it's really driven by our currency and its strength against the US dollar. So if the emerging markets are being battered as they are, the Turkish lira, the Argentinian peso, by the strength of the American dollar, I mean, there's not much we can do about that.
Can I just ask, how is it possible that countries outside of South Africa can sell the fuel cheaper, although they're buying it from us?
They don't put the levies on their fuel. So when you look at Lesotho and Swaziland and Botswana, who buy the fuel from us, we cannot, as a government or as a country, say to that country, you have to put these levies on your fuel. That's their internal decision. When we buy the fuel, I mean, we could sell fuel in South Africa for 11.50 a litre, but we add these other extra, taxes onto this. So we've got the 5.30 that we add onto that. But that's not something that we tell other countries they must do. So that when they buy it from us, they can sell it for whatever price they want to. And that's the reason why they're selling it cheaper in places like Namibia and Lesotho and Swaziland than in South Africa.
Because they obviously don't have the fiscal problems that we have in this country.
Well, it's not that they don't have those problems. They're just not adding the taxes to their fuel. So, which is why. But I mean, if they needed to get that money from somewhere, they could add some taxes to that fuel if they wanted to. Yeah.
Do you think government could make an effort to bring the fuel prices down? I mean, besides like saying, okay, well, let's just cut off the taxes, which they're never going to do.
Yeah. So the problem, the problem with the taxes is because that would happen in a fuel deregulated environment where we would take these taxes and we'd say, okay, we're going to cut them. As of tomorrow, the 5.30 on the fuel levies we don't pay. We don't pay the general fuel levy, we don't pay the road accident fund levy. That's fantastic. But how is government going to recover that money? They still need that money that is generated from those levies in state coffers. And we spoke about it as well. I mean, there has been a huge, unfortunately in the past couple of years, a lot of non-compliance with tax paying. And that just means that the coffers of government are running dry and people, and government needs that money. So how is it going to get that money? So let's take those taxes away. It's going to push VAT up to 20%. It's going to put income tax up, but to whatever. It's got to get that money somehow. So in our opinion, cutting the taxes is not necessarily the best way to go around it. When the levies do go up, as they do every year annually, we would suggest that they go up by not more than inflation. In this year, they went up by almost 18%. So that for us is one way in which they can manage it. You've got to create an environment for investment in the country. You've got to make sure you've got a stable economy. You've got to have policy certainty. These are all things that attract investment and attract money to the country. That's going to help strengthen the rand. But the weakness we're seeing in the rand at the moment is because of dollar strength and not because of weak rands. And what can we do about it? Unfortunately, Adam, not very much.
Well, as a layman's take on this is, why are motorists in particular getting targeted? Because there's a very small pool of motorists.
Yeah.
Yet if you put the VAT 20%,
yeah,
then everybody is paying an even share towards the fiscal.
Yeah, but VAT, if you put the VAT percentage up, and I mean, I don't want to get into debate, I'm not an economist, but if you put the VAT percentage up, you're targeting a lot more poor people than what you are with fuel. When it comes to the fuel issue, the one benefit government has with the fuel taxes is that it's an easy, quick, and very reliable source of income. When Adam goes to put in, money into his Bentley, he's paying. When I go put money,
you see him putting in his rolls.
In his rolls, yeah. Okay. When I go put money in my skadonk, I'm paying. So across the board, everybody is paying for that, and that's one of the benefits of the fuel taxes. They're easy to collect. They're across the board, and they don't penalise anybody. They penalise everybody.
One thing that's always confused me a little bit. You mentioned earlier that it is a regulated industry.
Yes.
Is why government don't say, okay, let's unregulate this. Let's say to the fuel companies, you can sell the fuel whatever you want as long as they're getting exactly the same taxes and they're getting the same money in. If the local petrol station down the road from you wants to sell the petrol at, he wants to make 1 cent a litre profit.
Yeah.
He should be able to do that. He
Yes.
should be able to say, okay, I'm going to knock 20 cents off and I'm going to get more people coming in. But we're not allowed to do that.
So the issue of regulation and deregulation is very interesting. And I mean, for us as the AA, this is actually where the debate needs to be at the moment in terms of the petrol price in South Africa. Where do we go in terms of regulation and deregulation? There are pros and cons to both of them. Deregulation is not the panacea that everybody thinks it is. There are some cons to it. One, you're going to be losing 200,000 people to the economy, because petrol pump attendants may lose their jobs when the petrol owners or the petrol company owners say, well, in order to make our prices more competitive, we're simply going to have a put in your own fuel type of system.
Self-fill.
Self-fill.
Yeah.
Okay, so that may be, so that's one issue that you've got to look at. There are issues around pricing, there are issues around refineries, there are issues around how the fuel gets transported across the country in a deregulated market. So it's not as simple as saying, let's deregulate, it's going to solve all our problems. I think it does need a lot of debate. I'm not an expert on regulation or deregulation. I know that there are people for and against both sides of it. But if you're looking at dealing with the petrol price and you're looking at dealing with it effectively, this debate on deregulation needs to be held, and government, in our opinion, should be concentrating on having this debate. Now, we know that the President has said that he wants this whole committee to look into the petrol pricing structure. We're waiting for that report to come out. Hopefully in that report, this issue of regulation and deregulation is part of it.
You do remember we do have elections next year.
Yes.
So I suppose a lot of those conversations will come. We will do our best. We will make sure.
Look, and I think the thing is, I think where government is in a bit of a bind at the moment is that this is a very pressing issue, and it's not something that goes away very quickly. Every month, if the petrol price goes up, we find that there's this new wave of resentment and of anger and of people saying, you know, well, we just don't want to pay this anymore. You know, a lot of unhappiness. So I think, yes, I understand that there's an election next year, but I also know that government is very committed to try and sorting this problem out. How much leeway do they have? Not very much, unfortunately. You know, in terms of the levies,
why don't they have that leeway?
Well, I mean, again,
what's restricting government from saying?
Look, we've got to buy the fuel on the international market set in dollar prices. So when we pay for that in a dollar price, if the dollar is strong and the rand is weak, we're just going to have to pay it. We can't negotiate and say, you know, we're really good guys, we want it for a little bit cheaper than what everybody else does.
Yeah, we're suffering.
We're suffering. Exactly. Nobody's going to buy that. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter how nice you are. People, they're still going to say you need to buy it. We need to get that fuel from wherever we buy it, Malaysia, Singapore, wherever in the Middle East. We need to get that fuel back to South Africa. That costs money. When it gets here, we need to store it, we need to keep it, we need to refine it. That costs money. Then we need to transport. I mean, all of that costs a certain amount of money. Take all of that out of the equation. We focus just on the levies. If we take the levies out of the picture, where else is government going to get that money? That's the debate that we had. I'm not saying that it's something that can't ever be done. I'm just saying, what is the alternative to taking it out? And that's for us where the debate needs to be.
The money's got to be found.
The money's got to be found somewhere, yes.
Once again, thank you very much for joining us here on Buyer's Guide.